Welcome, heroes. It's story time. This is a long tale for those who wish to hear it in its entirety. Part 2 will be read on my debut. This is a story of how a hero stumbled upon the house of the Copper Hounds. And without further ado, I will get to the story. The mouth of the void opened once more for Blood Rune to speak his name. This place came to be known as the Maw. He found solace in the quiet darkness. There was no pain, no regret, no heartache. All that existed was the slope of what is and what was colliding. The emptiness of the maw had a way of fogging memories. This was not a place for the faint of heart. Since his rebirth, the maw had become like a second home to Blood Rune. The cold enveloped him in its encompassing embrace. Although this time, it seemed that there were one too many pairs of hands in the shadow. Blood Rune's eyes grew wide at the realization he was not alone. The space was sacred to him. He had never known another soul to enter the maw. His instincts triggered an involuntary, acute stress response. If only briefly, he was frozen. The hero's curiosity reinvigorated his calmer mind. The darkness seemed different this time around. He found that the darkness was almost enlivened. It was yearning for something. Blood Rune saw a brief glint of white through the shadow. Were those fangs? He thought. As quickly as the impish smirk appeared, the smile vanished, accompanied by a brief giggle. Before Blood Rune could purse his lips to beckon a question, a familiar voice pierced the maw's foundation to resound distinctly. It was Echo. Blood Rune straightened. He found himself flooded with questions to be cut off before he could work up the courage to speak any of the thousands of words that assaulted his mind. She spoke with immeasurable grace, in a somber tone. Heroes are made in the hour of defeat. Tell me, Blood Rune, would you let my sacrifice be in vain? As her last words rumbled across the expanse of the maw, a path was lit by golden luminescence. It was almost as if thousands of fireflies had gathered in this dead space to dance just for Blood Rune. This was Echo's handiwork. She had been presumed dead for almost a year. What Blood Rune wanted was mostly to bawl like a child, but he knew no tears would accumulate in this realm. Instead, he found himself balling his fists and looking down at the path of radiance through the maw that Echo had lit. Even in death, Echo somehow produced poetry with the remnants of her life force and her power. Blood Rune laughed aloud at the absurdity of a Valkyrie ushering a hero towards life. The feather that Echo had plucked from her wings and entrusted to Blood Rune on the day that he was reborn as a hero began to emit a warm glow. He heard his mentor speak one last time. Go, make me proud. I will be with you every step of the way. Those words were not much, but they were enough for Blood Rune. Instead of asking questions, he found himself walking in the radiance of the dancing lights. There was nothing impeding him any longer. Each step became more sure-footed. A saunter became a trot became a dash. Blood Rune navigated the illuminated, sloped corridor of the maw with haste. He quickly found himself in view of an end. This was his way back. The golden path that the hero followed collided with a piercing white light that gutted the darkness like a javelin. Blood Rune shielded his eyes as he bounded through the white light with gritted teeth. The only words that remained in his thoughts were, "Make me proud." Blood Rune immediately coughed and spat blood. His head was bowed, with his luxurious red hair blowing and dancing just above the ground. The hero found that he was sitting upright with his legs sprawled out in front of him. His back had been resting on the fallen pillar of a support column from a parking garage. The world spun around him, rather. He had lost a significant amount of blood. His lungs begged for oxygen as dust choked the available air in his vicinity. Shallow, sharp breaths were all that he could muster. He recognized this feeling. This was the feeling of a punctured lung. Likely it was a broken rib that pierced the organ. The fog of the maw always makes this part of the process so jarring. Blood Rune's vision struggled to adjust to the light that was air-laden with dust. His heart was beating slow and weak. It was hard for him to form thoughts. Instinctively, he tried to raise his right hand to use his power. He shifted his gaze to what could only be described as the remnants of what was an arm. Compound fractures had destroyed his radius, ulna, and humerus. None of his muscles had any anchor points left to work with. It was only in this realization that the pain racked his entire body. Every nerve screamed within him. He was relieved to find that his left arm was in working condition. Blood Rune tenaciously smiled through the excruciating pain to call upon his power. Blood Rune turned his palm face up as it emitted a soft blue glow. All his blood that was lost and pooled around him began to collect into droplets, slowly encased in a blue light. The magic infused his blood and lifted from the ground, as well as his soaked black berserker garb, to form a bind rune. The bind rune consisted of symbols that had grown accustomed to using over the years. The bind rune formed was arguably one of his most useful. The resulting rune was made of Berkano, meaning regeneration, positive outcomes, and Algiz, protection and dispel ailments. Also Wunjo, comfort and harmony. Blood and the Elder Futhark were the deadly combination that defined Blood Rune. These were his tools. This was his weapon. This was his power. The blood from the bind rune dissipated into thin air. Immediately, Blood Rune found himself breathing effortlessly. The pain from his injuries began to dull, and a smirk peeked through strands of long hair that covered his face. The amount of blood that was used in this bind rune guaranteed this to be a strong spell. The guarantee provided a brief respite, with the hero knowing that the maw would not be visited again in the immediate future. Green eyes shot back and forth, assessing the scene. Asphalt could be heard cracking in the slow rhythmic patterns as the earth trembled. The whir of a camera drone could be heard fluttering somewhere in the vicinity. Small footsteps could be heard shuffling closer quickly. These were too small to cause any alarm. A small silhouette could be seen approaching the hero through the cloud of dust. Blood Rune sat still against the pillar as he allowed his injuries to affix themselves. A child of no more than 6 years old approached the hero rapidly, with tears streaming down their face. The child was sobbing so deeply that they were coughing in between breaths. The girl was small. She was of darker complexion, with brown eyes and silky black hair tied tight into a ponytail. The girl was wearing a golden jumpsuit with the word Valkyrie embroidered over the left breast and golden winged sneakers. She stumbled, climbing over debris as she approached Blood Rune, but quickly regained her footing when she saw the hero crumpled over. She yelped, "Mister, you can't die. Please don't die." This was a harsh world where even the young knew the dangers that heroes face every single day. The girl made it to Blood Rune and threw her arms around him. She wept into his chest. It was as if she believed that a hug would repair any injury present, if only that were true. Blood Rune's expression immediately softened as he exclaimed, "I can't die. I have to protect people like you." Blood Rune wrapped his unharmed arm across her back to meet her embrace as he pulled her away and read her jumpsuit labeled Valkyrie. A tear came to his eye as he chuckled and stated, "You know, she was my favorite hero too. She really was something special." The distraught girl wiped her tears with her palms and nodded, her head still crying. Blood Rune tilted his head back to meet the girl's gaze and remarked, Today, you are my hero. You came out here through the danger to save me all by yourself. And maybe, one day, you'll be the next Valkyrie." The girl's eyes beamed at his words, and she instantly smiled ear to ear. Blood Rune met her smile with his own. The cracking of asphalt could be heard encroaching ever closer to their location. Nonetheless, it was as if the two thought they were all there was in the world. Oblivious to the obvious danger of the situation, the The girl seemed enthralled with the hero. He was fair to look at, after all. The girl brought her hand to her mouth with a bashful expression to pose the question, "Are you hurt?" Blood Rune threw his head back to let out a hearty laugh. He snickered very matter-of-factly. "Pain is temporary." The girl let out a nervous laugh, her brain puzzling over the man's statement. Blood Rune's expression immediately shifted into a glower. His brows furrowed as he locked his eyes dead ahead, almost as if he were looking through his small companion. The impending danger had arrived. A hulking figure materialized through the dust as a mere silhouette in the distance. In a moment, the fog of the maw completely lifted from Blood Rune, and the severity of the situation quickly weighed heavy on his mind. Over the last 3 days, 34 quirkless children had been reported missing. Several schools had been established by the city, but it seems the children were not as safe as they thought, even with the protection of hero agencies. It was believed that a faction of Darwinists were the culprits. The evolution of quirks was believed by Darwinists to be a turning point in our existence as a species. In a Darwinist ideal world, there was no place for those who failed to adapt. The lives of those without powers were worthless to the progression of our species. Across the United States, tensions started to escalate as the group managed to persuade some heroes to join their cause. After the deaths of several top heroes, the purges were starting to become a more prevalent problem. The only question that was left unanswered was why the group had chosen to kidnap the quirkless children instead of outright killing them. There must be something more to the Darwinist plan. More gravely, every hero that had taken the contract to eliminate the threat behind the kidnappings lost their life. Bright Eye, Ambience, and Foxfire, all well-loved heroes of the community. Each one of them had a different reason to fight. Blood Rune had known them all. Those heroes were not to be taken lightly. It saddened Blood Rune to know that good people, no, good friends, were gone. Though the hero could be careless with his own life, he valued the life of every single person that he met after his rebirth. Blood Rune never fully mended from Valkyrie's death, and this was a new burden to carry. For the past year, Blood Rune had found himself taking private contracts for businesses rather than completing hero contracts. The sting of his mentor's death had brought him to a precipice where he was forced to redefine his purpose. He thought himself weak for not being able to save the very person that reinvigorated his lust for life. Over the last few months, he did things that he was not proud of. He found himself walking a thin line between a hero and the very people he swore to defeat. Things are not always so black and white. The world is grayer than anyone is prepared to admit. This contract was a large step back onto the path that Valkyrie had set Blood Rune upon. Though gone, her words still influenced the unlikely hero. Valkyrie's words always seemed to reach Blood Rune when no one else could. The sun shines for those who need the guidance of its light, but the darkness will embrace those who can find serenity within. Unwittingly, Blood Rune's hand traced the scars on his face as he ruminated. Blood Rune found himself chewing on those words as he felt the bones in his arms snap back into place with a loud crack. The girl visibly reeled at the sound and cringed. Blood Rune's smile never left his face. Pain had become an old friend to Blood Rune, and in some ways he found himself longing for it. Pain let him know that he was still alive. Blood Rune flexed and curled his fingers into a fist as he indifferently spoke, good as new. The girl marveled slack-jawed at the hero's speedy recovery as the hero rose to dust himself off. She looked him up and down, awestruck as the hero stretched. Blood Rune was of modest stature, nearing 6 feet, but not quite there. He was handsome despite the blood-smeared and claw marks across his face. The stark contrast did not do anything to diminish his fairness. She didn't quite notice the gleam of his eyes until he stood up, allowing his hair to blow freely in the wind. His hair, which rested on the small of his back, had a red sheen of color that mirrored a bloody sunset. The coloration of his eyes looked like leaves of ivy that reflected soft luster of the light-emitting feather that he wore around his neck. It was a gift from his mentor. Blood Rune continued to rotate his shoulder as the girl set her focus onto his arms. He was wearing plated clawed gauntlets, whose silver sheen complemented his quilted black tunic. The quilted armor was skirted and trimmed with fur around its edges. The girl shifted her gaze to the elegant pauldron that sat upon the hero's shoulder. The armor was fashioned into the shape of a wolf's head with prismatic rubies set for the eyes. On his feet, he wore a pair of sabatons designed to mimic the paws of a wolf. Likely this fashion led to others calling Blood Rune the Wolf of War. Two straps crossed diagonally along the breadth of the hero's chest, fastened by silver buckles. Anyone's attention would be grabbed by the ruby-adorned cincture while looking head-on at the hero. The belt held loops for the hero's axe, as well as a few tinctures of blood. The last and least impressive feature of Blood Rune's outfit was his red, torn and tattered cape. The cape had been through hell, and was probably more accurate depiction of Blood Rune's mental state than he would like to admit. While he was not the flashiest hero, his outfit complemented his body. It was easy to see that the scarlet-haired man was seasoned, and no stranger to physical activity. There was no part of him that was soft, except maybe his heart. Ignoring the immediate danger, Blood Rune looked at the girl and posed the question, "My hero, what is your name?" "My name is Iris." Blood Rune smiled, squinting his eyes and extending his hand to Iris. "A fine name for a hero. Let's get you back to your class, Iris." He gently took the girl's small hand in his own, as Iris smiled, not nodding her head before asking concerned, "Will you be okay?" Blood Rune let out a hearty laugh and confidently said to the girl, "With you here, nothing could stop me." Iris blushed bashfully as the two began to walk hand in hand down the city street together. The dust from the previous encounter, where the parking garage was leveled, was beginning to settle. The sound of asphalt cracking had mysteriously halted. Iris and Blood Rune continued walking back to the girls' school until they reached an impassable city street littered with debris. There was an alleyway that intersected the street that they were on, leading back to the daycare. The 3 blocks surrounding the daycare were evacuated moments after the attack was confirmed. An eerie silence permeated the scene of the shadowed alleyway. Blood Rune's instincts were sharp. Nothing about this alleyway seemed like a good idea. But it was the shortest path to their destination and Iris' safety. Iris almost cheerily skipped along with Blood Rune as they began to embark closer to their goal. Pins and needles raced down Blood Rune's back, and his hair stood on edge. Iris looked at Blood Rune when she felt his grip tighten. The pair stopped dead in their tracks. Blood Rune's face shifted to a lowered brow and tightened jaw as he bit his lip. Something was wrong. Hands moved deftly as the hero reached to his side for his prepared blood tinctures. He grabbed the glass container. A shattering boom was heard, but it was muffled. The vicinity and the sudden onset of the noise caused a knee-jerk reaction for Blood Rune to shatter the glass containing his prepared blood. Blood Rune's eyes were illuminated with blue light as he turned his palm. As the magic activated, strands of his hair flailed behind him, as if a gust of wind blew through the alleyway. The blood that began to fall to the ground from the crushed container ceased its descent to the ground to float and form an amorphous ball in Blood Rune's hand. Magically charged blood contorted and in an instant became 2 different runes. The first bind rune that was formed was from Algiz and Turisaz. Blood Rune envisioned an aegis around Iris while the rune formed. The second rune, Uruz, was singular. In the instant that these runes formed, bricks exploded from every direction. A hulking figure burst through the adjacent building to the alleyway about 25 feet ahead of Iris and Blood Rune. An armor-clad figure appeared double the size of Blood Rune in height and bulk. Iris's eyes widened and her expression was drowned in fear. The figure looked from side to side and fixed its gaze on the two. The monster of a man was wearing enough armor that wherever he stepped, the concrete had cracked. The weight of the armor alone would be enough to crush any man, hell, even some heroes. The armor that the figure was wearing resembled a shark. A fin protruded from the man's back and his pauldrons that were shaped to mimic fins as well. The helm that he adorned was shaped to imitate that of a hammerhead shark facing forward. The gorget of the armor looked like the lower jaw of a shark with serrated edges. The real danger resided in his weapons. One hand was fashioned to an enormous claw with knife edges much more akin to short swords. The left hand, just as deadly. Ironically, the left hand was not a hand, but it was fashioned to be that of a giant morning star adorned with raised cylinders. The morning star had at least 3 feet in circumference. The villain was aptly named Hammerhead. This was the captain of the Darwinist faction. The intimidating figure took a lumbering step forward and leaned into it. Claws and bludgeons began to move in rhythm. The speed in which the figure approached caught Blood Rune off guard. The creak and moaning of the armor became a tempo accompanied by the cracks of concrete. The monster that had set Blood Rune on a first-class trip towards death's door and leveled the parking garage single-handedly was bull-rushing towards them. Blood Rune was right to have dipped into his reserves and preemptively used his power. Iris now clung to the hero's leg. Magic now poured from Blood Rune's eyes as the blood dissipated. The runes disappeared and the hero felt an immeasurable strength course through him. His muscles became like steel cord. Blood Rune met the challenge with a grin ear to ear. Would this be how he was reunited with Valkyrie in the afterlife? Blood Rune would be damned if he would lose to the same person twice, let alone a shark. Something about sharks unsettled the hero, and rightfully so. Blood Rune cackled at the irony of a shark smelling blood in the water. In the few seconds his brain had to process the impending attack. The hero simply balled his fists, stood ready with an open-mouthed smile, and let his magic work. A whir could be heard again as 2 camera drones flew overhead to capture the moment of a villain and a hero clashing. Hammerhead reached the two, lifting his morning star above his head, aiming for the girl with the blow. Hammerhead growled, "The new world has no place for the likes of you." He brought the bludgeoning weapon down with such force that it caused a gust of wind in its wake. Iris shrieked. She closed her eyes and braced for the impact that was likely to end her life. When a few seconds had passed, she had not felt the oncoming blow. She dared to open her eyes to see what was going on. A bubble made of blue light, similar to the hero's magic, was surrounding her, protecting her from the villain's morning star, while suffering only the smallest of cracks. She looked up at the hero in amazement and caught the sight of a psychotic smile that twisted the man's features, blue light leaking from his eyes like tears before fading into nothing. For the briefest moment, Iris was unsure who possessed a more menacing presence, the hero at her side or the villain before them. Swiftly, Blood Rune leapt into the air, driving his knee into the underside of the villain's elbow, while his hands wrapped around the forearm, forcing it to fully extend. "We can coexist together. We can build a better tomorrow." The last word rang out, dripping with venomous ferocity, in the alleyway, accompanied by the sickening crunch of the villain's elbow being dislocated, a sound that was music to scarlet-haired hero's ears. Hammerhead roared in pain, but before he could react, Blood Rune landed on the ground and threw his back into the villain's hip. Blood Rune put all that he had into one fluid motion. The hero spoke through gritted teeth, his smile never leaving his face. "One day at a time, one step at a time." He stepped forward, turning his upper body with a fierce rotation while gripping the villain's left arm just above the elbow. Iris watched in awe through the magic bubble that encased her as Blood Rune launched the massive villain, flying headfirst down the alleyway at an intense speed. If she had blinked, she would have missed the encounter. Iris's eyes followed the projectile that was Hammerhead to see him crash through the cement wall of the building at the mouth of the alleyway where they entered. 2 booms were heard, indicating that he must have passed clear through the building. Blood Rune used an excessive amount of force, but that was to be expected. The villain had killed 3 other heroes, no, 3 friends of Blood Rune's. Blood Rune looked at his companion with a soft smile. The camera drone zoomed overhead, following the path of the villain's body to the building that he likely crashed through. The hero reached down for another blood vial stored on his belt as he spoke to Iris. "We don't have much time. If I live, he will not lay a hand on you." Iris opened her mouth, but no words formed. The girl watched as the hero crushed the vial and blood rose to the palm of his hand, encapsulated in magic. The soft blue glow that permeated Blood Rune's eyes made him look godly as his hair twirled in the wind. The blood reformed in the bind rune Turisaz and Sowillo. Blood Rune pictured a storm within his mind's eye. A maelstrom formed overhead as he raised his fist above his head. Thunder boomed as the storm raged in black clouds above their head, and in an instant, lightning came down to strike the hero's fist. Electricity swirled around his arm to spread throughout his whole body. Blood Rune's eyes swapped from the soft blue magical glow to a vibrant blue as electricity whipped around the corners and snapped from his eyelids. The hero grunted as he struggled to accept his newfound power. Iris watched the hero's muscles lurch and tense as he took a power stance. Beams of light poured through Blood Rune's eyes and mouth as he exhaled a bestial scream, accepting his gift. The storm dissipated as swiftly as it had brewed. The hero chuckled to himself, a single thought in his mind. This is how Thor must have felt. In that moment, the hero had never felt more alive. In the next breath, Iris blinked. She was with her classmates at the daycare. The protective bubble disintegrated around her as she watched the blue light evaporate to the air. The other children cheered as he stood amongst them. Blood Rune stood electrically charged at the entrance of the school. "He's not number 1, but he sure is cool," one of the children cheered. Blood Rune raised his hand, flashing a thumbs up, and winked to Iris, his tiny savior. Iris beamed ear to ear, returning the thumbs up with one of her own. The hero created a wind shear, and in a gust of wind, and on a bated breath, he was gone from sight. With the kids out of immediate danger, Blood Rune was free to pursue Hammerhead in his regular fashion. Destruction would surely follow in the hero's wake. Blood Rune came upon the building that he threw the villain through at breakneck speed. The villain was already towering just before the mouth of the building where he first crashed through. Hammerhead seemed to be unfazed and had already reset his dislocated joint. Without missing a stride, Blood Rune turned himself into a missile, rotating in the air so his feet acted like a drill point, directed at his foe. A deafening crash reverberated around them as Blood Rune collided with the villain's cuirass. Dust was thrown high into the air from the resounding shockwave. The camera drones overhead struggled to stay in flight. As soon as Blood Rune made an impact, he could tell something was off. The villain was even heavier than before, and his armor had no give. The villain simply slid backward a few feet. Hammerhead laughed like a titan. The villain bellowed, "To think I had to use this much armor on the likes of a brat like you." Hammerhead's inherent quirk was the creation of armor he held his body within. One could only imagine how muscled the body underneath that armor was. Somehow, the villain appeared significantly larger, and Blood Rune was about to realize the repercussions of his mistake. Hammerhead gripped around Blood Rune's ankle with the 2 of his clawed fingers. Blood Rune's electrically charged eyes shot wide as Hammerhead swung Blood Rune forward towards the concrete. The hero braced himself by raising his arms closed around his head. Blood Rune's body met the concrete and his bones cracked like twigs. Blood spurted from his arms, and at the same time, any air within his lungs was pushed out. The villain ragdolled Blood Rune's body back behind himself, smashing him again. The sudden change of direction caused Blood Rune's femur to split, and his leg contorted in a strange angle before he hit for the second time, shattering his arms even further. Blood spurted from the hero's compound fractures as the villain pinwheeled the hero's body, sending him crashing through the building dead ahead of them. This time, the hero managed to stay conscious despite the pain. The agony he was in quickly rescinded as his limbs magically mended. This could be a better match than the hero originally anticipated. Against anyone else, this villain's brute strength would have decimated their bodies. Blood Rune was wise to have prepared strength and protection spells after using regeneration. Although the two prior would lose potency more quickly, the hero eyed the blood around him as he shook his head and stood onto his feet. Blood Rune's pride stopped him from casting any further spells to aid in this current endeavor. The villain could be heard approaching surely and slowly. First of all, thank y'all for listening. This was part 1 of 2 explaining how your hero ended up in the house of the Copper Hounds. To hear the magic of part 2, drop by on my debut. My debut is September 4th at 10 a.m. Pacific time or 1 p.m. Eastern time. I hope to see y'all there. And remember, we can build a better tomorrow together. One day at a time, one step at a time.